Soccerex Connected, a very good afternoon. Ben Jacobs with you. It is day 4. Our theme is commercial, broadcast and marketing, a 5-day event. Full schedule available on our website and via the app as well. Please do engage with the exhibitors too. Take plenty of private meetings as well. We obviously want to feel as connected as possible, even during these socially distanced times. Over 2,500 delegates have registered and it's got a very global feel. And we'll move on in just a moment to our next panel entitled What Women Want. I'll give you more details in just a second. But our presenting partner today is Teamworks. And as a result, if you would like to win the signed shirt of the day, all you've got to do is tell me 2 footballers that just work together, a partnership. It can be an actual partnership, a historical one, or a fictional one too. Maybe you've got 2 players that have never played together that you think would make good partners. But if you want to win the signed shirt, tweet us at Soccerex. Please use the hashtag Soccerex Connected as well. And just tell me 2 footballers that simply work together. And then, if successful, you can win that signed shirt. We've got lots available here at Soccerex HQ. Deco, Laurie Lindsay from the US Women's National Team, Carlos Alberto, and a few others. The Edwin van der Sar one has gone. That was our winner on day 1. The Parma jersey as well has already been taken by Ty Ortega, the winner of yesterday's competition, but lots of shirts available. So please do get in touch. Thanks to Cute Sports Guy, whose real name I believe is Nelson. He says Kane and Son. We've obviously had a few for them, given their form this season. Jonathan says Beardsley and Cole. George says Vardy and Mahrez during their Leicester days when they won the English Premier League. And LRT90 has been in touch and says it has to be York and Cole. Please do give me some from women's football as well. I've had a couple of people get in touch with alternative options from Europe and Asia, but most of them are in the men's game. And remember, we want entries from both the worlds of men and women's football. I know that Jill was in touch and flagging Mia Hamm as her favourite player. So maybe you want to partner her with somebody and tweet me via at Soccerex. And I've had one entry that simply says Arnold and Flaherty, and Jack Sullivan, who's one of our next panelists, will know who those 2 are. Mackenzie Arnold and Gilly Flaherty, both playing for West Ham women. So that's a good partnership there from 2 current footballers. And that brings us nicely on to our next panel. And as I say, it's entitled What Women Want. Where are we at and where are we heading towards? And the focus here is that sponsors, broadcasters, teams and federations have got a level of freedom to innovate in women's football, not often seen on the men's side of the game. The access is better, and so are the opportunities, both in terms of fan engagement and generating commercial revenue. A good example of that a few years back is the West Ham United women documentary that Jack Sullivan and his team were a part of. But even last night, if you look at Manchester City's victory over Burnley, Aoife Mannion and Janine Becky took over the club's Instagram channel. The access was better and it helped engage and allow those athletes to tell their story. So far from copying the trajectory of men's football, we will discuss now new paths being forged by stakeholders in women's football and see whether there are lessons that can be learnt. We're delighted to be joined by, as I've already alluded to, Jack Sullivan, the Managing Director of West Ham Women. Alongside him, Ashlee Font-Cumber, the Commercial and Branding Manager for the Girls Academy. Kayleigh Grieve is part of this panel. She is the Women's Football Marketing and Sponsorship Manager at UEFA. And Kelly Simmons MBE is also part of this panel. Delighted she can join us from the FA, where she is the Women's Professional Game Director. And our moderator, brilliantly qualified because she's had a foot in both camps, a former journalist and now the head of women's football at the European Club Association. It's a very good afternoon to Claire Bloomfield.
Thank you very much, Ben. As you say, my name is Claire Bloomfield. I'm the head of women's football at the European Club Association. And I must say it's an absolute pleasure to be able to host today's women's football panel. Now, women's football is a period of extraordinary growth on the back of improved exposure, commercial interest in domestic and international competitions, and engagement in the sport is at an all-time high. It's on the cusp of something brilliant, as I've said so many times before. But crucially, the game is also in a unique position to take the learnings from men's football and do things differently. Rather than simply mimicking what has come before, women's football can set the examples for the rest of sport to follow. Now, as you've heard, I'm joined by an expert panel to discuss this topic in depth. And Jack Sullivan, I'll turn to you first as someone who has never been afraid to do things differently. Since taking charge of West Ham United women, how have you leveraged the advantages of being integrated with the men's team whilst maintaining this ability to still do things your own way?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And obviously we've got a hugely supportive and hugely ambitious men's side on our in the same office and the same training ground as well. So obviously leveraging that and leveraging the huge fan base, the huge commercial revenues that we already produce on a men's side is obviously such a great way for us to look at that. But I think always, look, we've been incredibly lucky. I've worked with Karen Brady, who's obviously was probably the first woman in football, or on the business side of men's football. Tara Warren as well, another one who's the marketing director of West Ham United. And I think what we always said is there's differences between the men's and the women's game, and we have to make sure that we highlight both of those. But where there has been really good successes on the men's side, can we replicate them on the women's side in a different sort of way or different sort of scenario? Obviously, the documentary came up, which mentioned before, and that was a great opportunity for us that we thought would be a perfect opportunity to showcase the women's, and also different sorts of partners as well, of where we've got a skincare brand, Zio Skincare, and that's the brand that we thought predominantly would work better on the women's sector, and it would be good to test it on the women's sector. But I think it's around just basically making sure the opportunities are open as much as possible, and working with brands or with fans and saying, look, what do you want? And then also tailor making that. And because I suppose a lot of the time, no ground has really been, we're almost making the ground as we're playing. It almost means it's almost like designing a house. And that's what we've had with the women's team, of where we've been able to say, okay, well, we want it to be like this, so let's make it like that, and let's do that. Where sometimes at traditional men's clubs, where there's been a long period of heritage, or there's been a way that things have to be done, sometimes it can take longer to change those to maybe the way that you think. But where we've been incredibly lucky is we've had such supportive sponsors that have almost been on that journey with us. We've had some that have been on that professional journey, some that have come now, and I think it's one of those things of where the biggest thing for us is, what do the people want almost, and then how can we tailor make ourselves to be as bespoke as that as possible. And I have to say that the men's team have been brilliant. They've worked with us amazingly well, and also the fans have as well, and they've supported us in their thousands. And we got 24,000 last year at the London Stadium against Tottenham, which was the third highest attendance in the Women's Super League ever, which was just amazing. Obviously, as well, that we took a large number to Wembley as well when we reached the FA Cup final 2 years ago now as well. So we've been incredibly lucky, but we know that the journey's just beginning. And obviously, COVID's been a great time to look at different sorts of angles and different ways of how we're all working. This event's a perfect example of how things work in different ways.
And that kind of takes me on very well into my next point that I want to touch on with you, Kayleigh, because your achievements in leading the rise of the professional game in England have been nothing short of extraordinary. But what was key to winning the hearts and minds of the organisation to make this long-term commitment to the professional game?
Yeah, I think, first of all, in the last few years, probably under Martin Glenn and then under Mark Bullingham, our more recent chief exec, there's been just a different level of ambition around the women's game. So I think previously the organisation had focused on participation, more sort of grassroots in terms of the girls' game, but now the commercial development of it, the professionalisation of it is a big strategic priority. And it makes complete, business sense, it makes football sense. And I think as well, we've got a really clear strategy for the growth of the professional game. We're all united, the clubs, the Football Association, our stakeholders, behind our mission that we want the best women's sports league in the world. We've got a clear strategy around growing our audiences, growing our revenue to ultimately build sustainability, about developing and attracting world-class players, but developing world-class players as well. So our academies, our youth development, being really critical to have that blend of world-class and English talent. So we've got a clear plan, we've got ambitious plans, and everybody's very much behind that, both in the organisation and in the clubs like Jack's at West Ham, who are doing a terrific job.
Now, Ashlee, you and I have talked previously about how fortunate I am at ECA to be part of an organisation where women's football isn't just the any other business item on the agenda, but it's actually a priority. Ashlee, where do you think that the key is to achieving this positive mindset more widely across the women's game?
Great, thank you. That's actually a tough question. And in a society where we're used to instant results, I think the answer isn't the greatest. I think it's time, right? So specifically in the US, I mean, culturally, before we can even get to women's football, we have the NFL, then we have the MLB, and then we have the NBA, the NHL, then we have the MLS, and then the WNBA, and then finally we can get to the NWSL. So we're not only working against, you know, the institutionalization of men's sports, but also football in this country. When you say football, it's American football, right? So it's really deeply embedded in the narrative of sport to spectators and to investors that sport belongs to men. So I think we're, you know, on a positive note, I think we're slowly changing just by having a presence. You know, we did have 2 professional leagues fail here before with WUSA and WPS. They failed after 3 seasons. So the NWSL now is in that historic, time frame, but they're still very small, and we're still working to establish legitimacy and credibility, right? So I think ultimately to create that more positive, widely accepted narrative for what the women's space, it's, look, we need better quality and quantity of media coverage. We need endorsements from powerful actors within the space. And we need investors that are bought into helping change the mindset and raise that level of viability and visibility, right? So personally, what I've done, we try to really work on that with the spirit in the beginning years of the NWSL, and we were able to accomplish some things in a very small period of time to bring it from survivable to sustainable to profitable within 3 years, by making sure we were doing that with the coverage and endorsements and the investors. But I think ultimately more wider spread, it just takes time.
I guess inevitably our conversation will turn to coronavirus because it's added another layer of complications. Kayleigh, are the kind of far-reaching consequences that we've all talked about as a result of COVID, are they being felt already at the negotiating table in the conversations you're having at the moment with potential sponsors?
I think we've lost some time. I mean, we were at UEFA, we unbundled our commercial rights to women's football, our sponsorship rights, a number of years ago, and we just happened to be in the cycle of finishing one cycle this year and then in the market for the next cycle. So I don't think we necessarily will see a big impact because it just, from a timing perspective, it's delayed us being in the market, but the people are still there in the market wanting to talk to us. The enthusiasm for the product is definitely still there. I think if anything as well, the risk associated coming out of the back of a financial crisis like this with the bigger properties actually turns even more heads towards other elements that deliver some of the same attributes that bigger sports properties have traditionally, but we maybe are less risk attached due to the price points and but the same kind of level of access and storytelling ability, etc. So yeah, it's not easy. We're up against it a little bit from a time perspective, but we definitely haven't seen a complete withdrawal from the table from anything. If anything, you know, we signed Pepsi in August, which was a huge 5-6 year deal that, you know, and that was a very, very uncertain time. So, you know, we see positive stuff, but I mean, I have to caveat, we perhaps benefited from being in a certain type of cycle at that time. So I can't say that that's the case for everybody who has different rate cycles and different challenges potentially. But for us, the enthusiasm's there, and like I have to say, I hope we benefit a little bit from the perhaps reevaluating of risk and maybe potential purses available for sponsorship, and we might be an attractive proposition for some brands that weren't looking at us previously.
Ashlee, if I can take it back to you, how do we best limit the damage to investment going forward, given that you're somebody with such extensive experience at running successful organisations?
You know, I think what's always worked well in my experience is that we just have to get creative and be collaborative, right? So right now in this time, I mean, it's a very unfortunate time for so many people. We have to be very sensitive to that. But there are people are starving for interaction, right? Still, because they're limited what they can do socially, and then investors still need touch points with their consumers, right? So trying to have those conversations to figure out how can we get real innovative and creative and make sure we can still capitalize on the opportunities that do exist, because ultimately we're both interdependent on each other, right? So we can do that through what we've done with the Girls Academy. We've really gotten creative with our digital engagements through social media, collaborative strategic initiatives. For example, we have a phenomenal partner with Instat, and with the recruiting dead period for some of these players going to play in college, recruiters can't come out and see them play, right? Some states have restrictions on actually being able to play anyways. So with Instat, our statistical provider, we have a Be Seen Always campaign. So it's, you know, two birds with one stone type scenario where we're actually being able to get great exposure for our players, for the national team scouts, for the college scouts, for the pro scouts. And at the same time, we're actually providing incredible value to our partner. And that's just based on, you know, hey, we got together, we assessed the situation, we looked at collaborative initiatives, and it's actually been really successful. So I think in this trying time, really even getting closer and staying engaged is going to help once we come out to hopefully blossom into something even better.
Now, Jack, you've taken a very strong approach at West Ham to kind of ridding us of this idea of, you know, strike a deal with the men's side and get the women's side free, and you're attributing value to the women's team. What have you gained from this other than the very obvious financial benefits?
I think of course, I think the men's, or let's say it's a men's deal, they'll see value for the women's team as the women's team, and they'll look to activate those assets themselves. Joe, who I think is actually watching now, he's from Global Reach, and they've seen really great value off the back of some foreign exchange and B2B introductions we've been able to do for them. And I think that's a women's and men's deal, but it's something where what we said to them is we want to dissect it and we want you to see value from both. And I think it's around educating brands that there can be value in that. And explaining to them how they can see value, and explaining that we've had 100,000 new social media followers this year, explaining how other brands have activated correctly. Coronavirus has been been a really interesting time for us all to learn how to activate correctly. And that's been something that we found really interesting, and how to leverage our social media following, how to look maybe more into B2B and to look at all sorts of sides of how that can work. And I think it's really just educating brands, and what we have seen is the more brands that are engaging with us. So Bankwest Tech's another good example of where they partner with the team, and then they've actually stopped partnering the men's team, and then they've come on board even further with the women's and joined us on the back of the shorts. So it's and a huge thing for them is diversity, inclusion, and they want to show in a male dominated industry like IT that and similar to football, where you can stand out and you can stand up on your own 2 feet. So it's been a really interesting time for us, and it's been really exciting, and it's a case of, I think, explaining to brands, and also the more testimonials we've had of brands diving in and seeing value, it's then made those conversations easier, because they're starting to see case studies and things like that of brands seeing value. And once you can explain that to them, and you can explain the huge growth, and what we say to most of them is get in now, because look, in 2016, I was doing a bit of research before we started, but there's now 12. In 2016 there was 6,000 teams in the UK. Now there's 12,000. Broadcasting's gone up 231% in the amount of peak audience in the UK. And the Women's Super League, 2 years, Kayleigh can correct me if I'm wrong, we weren't broadcasting outside of the UK, and now we've got 9 different territories. So I think what we're trying to say to brands is, look, get in now, sign a 3-year contract, because in 3 years' time or a year's time, we're going to be asking for double the money. So it's one of those things of where, look, come in now, see terrific value. And I suppose, look, we want to, for me and for everyone at West Ham, we want to see longevity through our partnerships. We've signed a 6.5-year deal with Betway, a 5-year deal with Umbro. For us, it's all about longevity. So we want those brands to come on board, and we want them to be part of that journey with us. And I think where a lot of the brands have seen great value from the women's team is they've really bought into, they feel part of the club. They generally feel that their money makes a huge difference, which it does. And it's ongoing conversations that, look, we're having with the FA and Kelly and everyone there, that the key for us is for the women's league to come sustainable. And the best way to do that is through income and making sure that these world-class players are still coming in. This year we've had Rachel Daly coming in, England international, and two Australian internationals, and players from all around the world. And we want to continue to keep doing that. But the only way we continue to keep doing that is if these brands come and support us. And then obviously, look, I always say the same thing. We have to support them, and we have to show value to them. They're not going to sponsor. They get offered 50, 100 different sorts of things to sponsor a day. What's going to make us stand out? And I think that is our amazing fan base, how much access the players give, and how supportive the players can give. And also, it's a real different way to market as well. And I think at the moment, with people obviously pressing the skip button on YouTube or fast forwarding television ads or whatever that is, it's a real interesting way to, and a real good way to build a narrative of where they feel really part of something, and the fans feel a connection to those brands getting involved in women's sport, because they know that money is really going in and making a real big change.
Another real big change that we should certainly mention, certainly in England, is how the FA player has transformed the visibility of the game globally. And Kayleigh, just can you kind of give us a summary of the benefits that you've already seen as a result of the introduction for the FA player?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think when we launched FA Player, we're coming off the back of a hugely successful Women's World Cup. 25 million people were following the Lionesses in England. Our broadcast partner who's done a fantastic job for us is BT Sport. Obviously, it's behind a paid wall. It's one live game a week, and therefore we've got to think about how do we get more live games out there? How do we get them out globally? How do we reach our fan base who can't maybe afford to pay for BT Sport, etc. So we were very conscious about getting more live, more highlights out there quickly. So FA Player, the OTT offering, was really key part of that strategy. If we sort of move forward now, as Jack's mentioned, we're in a number of territories across the world. We're working with a partnership with Pitch, who are selling, in South America, in Australia, in parts of Europe, NBC in the US, Canada, etc. So we've now got, alongside being able to watch games on FA Player globally, and of course we've got a number of global stars playing the WSL, which is increasing global interest in the league. Then they can either watch through their own networks, if we've got partnerships there, or through the FA Player. And of course it's really key as well to us in terms of our domestic following. And I think, moving forward in the next few weeks or so, we'll announce a really exciting new domestic partnership, which is going to be exponential growth in terms of our audiences. But it's still going to play a really, really key role for us, because there will still be live games that we want to get out there. It'll play a key role for us with our other properties like our Conti Cup, FA Cup, really building profile in the Championship. That's absolutely fundamental to the game, that we have a strong pyramid, that we build the Championship alongside the WSL. So it still play a really, really key role, not just with live games, but obviously fans across the world being able to come in and see highlights and see interesting content. So I think it's been really, really key for us, and will continue to be key for us in the development of the women's game.
And I guess as a follow-up to that, how do we ultimately transform that growing audience into fans coming through the turnstiles post-COVID? I guess we have to really think about innovation in that space.
Yes, well, pre-COVID, first of all, to say we're absolutely desperate to get the fans back. I'm sure I speak for Jack and all the clubs. We miss the fans. We can't wait for when it's safe for them to come back. Pre-COVID, we were up 200%. We'd seen some fantastic attendances. We'd really focused on the calendar, putting the big games in the best slots, utilising the FIFA men's windows where there's not Premier League action to go up against. Games in main stadia, the clubs have done a terrific job utilising their fan bases, the data they've got on their fans. We've done a lot of work to understand who our fans are. We've got a potential 6 million engaged fan base of 16 to 34-year-olds with a male skew who follow men's football passionately and increasingly coming over and engaging in the women's game. So, more about our fans, we're collecting more data on our fans, and the clubs and ourselves are working really hard we were pre-COVID, to get those fans through, and we've got to continue that work. That's, it's a really, really important part of our strategies going forward alongside building our audiences. So attendance is really, really key. I can't wait to get back to it as soon as it's safe to do so.
Neither can we. UEFA and ECA are working closely on projects together to kind of better understand this rapidly evolving commercial landscape and address this lack of data. And you touched on there, Kayleigh, just how crucial this data is about the audiences that we serve. But Ashlee, how does the land lie in the States when we kind of have this conversation about striking a crucial balance between reach and revenue? What's your take on it, Ashlee?
Right. So I think, look, if you flip on the channels and if you can see axe throwing and the cornhole league being broadcast, then there shouldn't be a question about women's football being broadcast, right? And when it comes to reach versus revenue, well, the investment has to come before the return, right? So there's this perceived risk that's not quite being taken. And if it's not taken, then you just won't get the reach. So you need to take that in order to create that awareness, create the access, and then you'll start to see the rewards come in based on the reach that you're going to be able to expand to. We just need to take the time and effort to put into these negotiations with that market research. Like you guys tapped on the data piece of it. We need to understand that so much better. So when we do get into the broadcasting deals, which we have done a little bit, we do it right? So we need quality coverage. We can't just do it to do it. The coverage needs to be quality. It needs to be in the appropriate time slot. It needs to be marketed to the appropriate audiences, right? Because if we broadcast, but we don't actually put the effort into doing it right, then we'll continue to fail at this long-term sustainability and the thriving in the marketplace that we're all seeking to do. And I think we can all agree, we know the viewership's there. It's been proven time and time again, from mega events that we've had to some of just the mainstay games that have been played. We just need to give people access. And I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Auto Football. They're working really hard to make that difference. And by buying rights to some of these, I think they bought the rights for Super League maybe, and then they're trying to sell those off to, just selling off those broadcasting rights. Here in the States with the NWSL, we've seen, look at their fall tournament. It was broadcast on CBS. They had an average of 383,000 viewers, which is great. It's streamed globally on Twitch. They said they broke over 1 million viewers on one of the games. So again, the viewership is there. We need to create also, we have to take ownership ourselves, right? Accountability, that we need to create the better data, better market research to understand what we're actually going to be able to deliver. So then we can get that reach, we can get that return. And to Jack's point, honestly, to tie this back in, it's like, get in now. This opportunity to get in isn't going to exist forever. It's very limited.
I'm sure Kayleigh would have a very similar message. And taking to that point, Kayleigh, I mean, what are you UEFA learning about the fan base for women's football and the need to communicate with this fan base differently? I mean, do the traditional communication channels, are they still as effective in the women's game, or do you take a very different approach?
I just think it's very fragmented, and you have to be quite comfortable with it being fragmented and having a few different strategies for different audiences. So we found that in Europe, women's football was left to kind of grow quite organically for a while. So there's a real strong kind of culture and community around it that have built. which is small, but it's rich and it's influential. And clearly where we're trying to get to is more scale. If you look at the men's game and our constant equivalent, you're always looking at that scale, and that's what's attractive. And the whole commercial model around football is built around that access to that scale. So it's trying to find that medium. So that scale comes from people who watch men's football, and they have a certain perception of how football is and what they want to see when they see the product and how they're communicated to. But we find our women's football audience tend to skew a bit younger, a bit more female, and they don't all want to be communicated to in the same ways at the same time with the same content. So we have to not be lazy, essentially, and create communities and create spaces and create narratives that allow it to be accessible to lots of people. If you skew too far young and too girly, and it's all around just the girls who play football, they'll stay too small and it won't attract the big numbers. And if you just paper over all that and you just replicate what the men's is, you stay as the baby sister to the big game for a lot longer than you want to. So it's not an exact answer necessarily for you, Claire, but it's what we kind of wrestle with constantly is, okay, we've got this huge database and access to the men's football audience, and we chip away at that data and we test things and we try and bring them into the women's game through different ways, whether that's through their club affiliation that we know about or their national team affiliation and how they react to content. We cross promote, and we're starting to learn more about who from that huge men's football audience are the most ripe to bring over. That tends to happen around the big tournaments. Naturally, they're a bit more accessible. They're out there. And then how do we expand this core women's football audience, the more hardcore, and how do we give them more access? And that audience, we tend to be, we're on YouTube, we've got podcasts on Spotify, we're on Snapchat, like TikTok, we've got quite a big TikTok channel now. That audience tend to sit a bit in that space. So it's a balancing act between creating something that is genuinely for everybody, but not losing the spark about women's football that the culture has grown around, and trying to take that and make that as attractive and accessible to as many of the kind of bigger scale audience as we can. But I think men's football has grown itself, and men's sport generally, through a broadcast era, and it's just that this era of time has been all about broadcast, and we're just not in that anymore. So if we start to try and catch up with that and build women's football around that when it doesn't really exist, it just doesn't make sense. So we have to try and catch the last bit of the wave of that, in a sense, and maximize what we can from there, but really get to the heart of, well, what's coming next? How are audiences going to be approached? How are we going to build communities? It's a bit more maybe niche, but a bit more heavily engaged. Is that the way things will be? Then how do we build that foundation for the women's game so that it does have a legacy, and it's not always just catching up on something that's already had its peak and left? So yeah, it just makes it challenging that you have to break things down a bit more, try and personalize it a bit more, and try and think and facilitate for these different audiences that you have and what they want, and try and talk to them as much as possible and test with them and learn from them.
And I guess by way of a follow-up for that, I mean, what is the key to a successful marketing campaign on a limited budget? Because we know that, so many in the women's football community are struggling with exactly that.
For us, the players are actually quite key to that. They have quite significant reach now, and if we pay players to be involved in all their campaigns, etc. But we can put money straight into Facebook advertising, Instagram advertising, Twitter, or whatever, or we can use the players and the communities that they organically build and engage them with us, and then feed out campaigns through them. So that is quite I think just trying to build that real strong foundation of our community marketing itself well and advocating itself well. Then, of course, there's a bit of, paid, more traditional type promotional activity that will need to come on top. And yeah, making sure that the ultimate product that is the live match is available. And that's something that sounds like we're all working super hard on at the moment to strike deals and get setups in place that make sure that the availability and visibility of these matches is easy and everybody can get there to it.
Now, Jack, kind of keeping on that theme, how can women's team best drive value for a sponsor, in your opinion? Kind of what unique activation opportunities could West Ham offer, for example?
Well, to be totally honest with you, we are completely flexible in how we work. We've worked with Kia on a one-off activation, and we've also worked with people on a 3-year deal, 1-year deal. So what I always say to the sponsor is, how can we help you? What are your goals? What do you want to succeed? And then it's up for us to build a package that suits them, whether that's experiences, or whether that's some companies just want a straight B2B, some people just want brand awareness, and it's up to us on how we build that. And we work really hard with all of our partners, and something we pride ourselves upon is a complete bespoke package. We're about to go to market with our sleeve for next season on a women's side of things, and what we would always say to a brand is, look, this is what we can offer. How can we work with you in making that work? And sometimes where they've been involved, like Bartercard, for example, who's now the sock tie-up sponsor of the women's team, they came with football experience, so they knew exactly what they wanted. They wanted some social media, they wanted some backdrop, they wanted some static boards, everything like that. And then there's some companies that don't really know what they want, and then we work with them and say, look, we suspect your target audience is this correct? They say yes or no, and then we can start to build a package with them. But I think for us, the best way to be is to be completely flexible. We know some clubs have packages, and what we feel like is when a package is made up or just a blanket package is signed, that sponsor will look through that and they'll say, well, that we'll use, that we won't use, that we'll use, that we won't use, but we'll pay that. And it's a bit like, well, no, we want you to see at the end of that sponsorship that every single right that you're given, you're ticking and saying, yeah, that was great value. Oh, we did an event at the training ground and we saw great value because some of our high net worth client or whatever that may be turned up and they had a great day, or one of our biggest suppliers bought his daughter, or it could be we did this great activation that got seen by 200,000 people or even more, or however that works. And it's for us to be completely flexible. And I think, to be honest with you, whenever we sign a contract, we know we've signed that contract, but COVID's a great example where no one saw this happening. And it was one of those things of where, okay, well, now COVID's happened. How do we adapt with those partners to make sure that they're still going to see the same amount of value? And I think that's what we've worked really hard on. And I suppose that's really it of where we try our best to see that sort of value. And a big thing for us as well was to try and get partners with the same values as us that believe in the community. That's a huge thing for us. And to work within the community and continue to support that, which is such a massive thing for West Ham and is a huge part of the club's ethos.
Now, while I have you, Jack, I have to ask, talk to us about the West Ham documentary. Obviously, you touched on it earlier. What was the motivation of opening your doors to the cameras and showing this very unfiltered view of what's happening inside a women's football club in England? I mean, is this purely about brand awareness?
I think for us, the opportunity came around, and to be honest with you, the men's marketing team at the time I think they were a bit worried about I'm trying to think how old I was at the time, probably an 18 or 19-year-old running a football club, and the things I could have said or done or things like that. But I think once they saw the first episode, they were a bit more relaxed about everything. And I think it was an incredible journey. That summer we went from semi-professional to full-time. So we signed 18 new players. We got a whole new backroom staff of where when we were semi-pro there was 2 or 3, and some were part-time, some were full-time. Then we had 10 backroom staff. We had to get crowds up as well and everything like that. And it was a really exciting journey from signing our first partnership. And I remember running back and forwards with the contract, making sure we had the shirt ready for the pictures and everything like that. And I think people really loved that journey, really. And it was on BBC 3, and then it was so successful that they put it on BBC 1, and each episode was seen by around 2 million people. So the biggest motivation, I suppose, for us was there was a threefold. There was a selfish one. I want and still want to be, when a brand thinks of women's football, they think of West Ham Women's. And if they Google women's football, they see West Ham United Women's, and they see us as breaking the ground, and we're the ones that are constantly looking to do new things. And that's something we want to be on our socials. We're the third highest across all of our socials compared to lots of other clubs that have had women's teams for a large period of time. That's in the UK. And I think that was one selfish reason. The other reason was we need people to see women's football, whether that's through a documentary, whether that's through following us on Instagram, Twitter, through the men's side, or just having eyeballs on women's football, whether that's the news. And we thought the documentary was a really good way to get a lot of eyeballs on women's football, because the bottom line is if we introduce 2 million people or 1 million people to women's football, if 5 of those, or if 500,000 of those go and follow their women's team, and 1,000 of those or 20,000 of those go and then watch the games, that's going to grow the game, which overall is going to be a huge benefit to everyone in women's football. So that was really the big motivations, and we dealt with quite a small production company at the time on it, and I really liked the idea of we were both growing at that sort of time, and it was amazing, and we gave them complete full access. And it was what we wanted to show, is we wanted to show a real football club. Where when you watch some documentaries, it's a super glossy sort of type thing, and something we couldn't have written or wrote. I'm trying to think what one's the correct one, but was the FA Cup final, which was obviously a dream come true in our first season, which was pretty amazing, and I think was a huge success for the whole team. And I think what the documentary makers, Dove, Polly, Charlie, Alana, they almost became almost like staff on the team. So they were included in all the team meetings, and they wanted us to succeed and achieve as much as possible. And I think when you watch that documentary, it's a hugely proud moment for us as a football club, and what we said to Kayleigh and what we said when they decided to put us in the Women's Super League. We said we will come up with new ways to market. We will be one of the leaders in trying to grow the game, and hopefully that documentary did it, and we didn't do ourselves too much disjustice.
Well, if you haven't seen it, anyone, please do look it up. It's a fantastic watch, and I do hope that we see other women's teams following your footsteps there, Jack. But if I can turn to you, Kayleigh, I mean, one of the things I love about working in women's football is this idea of being very competitive on the pitch, but very collaborative off it. I mean, are you getting phone calls from leagues around the world, Kayleigh, who are saying, can you give us a roadmap? I mean, how did you do it? How did you develop this league with global appeal?
Yeah, I've had quite a few phone calls, but then I've made a few as well, because I think we can always learn from each other. FIFA put together a group of the professional women's leagues. I found that hugely useful, and hopefully we'll meet quite often. But absolutely, generally just sort of wanting to understand how leagues have developed, how countries have developed professional women, the challenges. We've shared a lot of ideas and talked through a lot of challenges, and it's very useful. I think as well, we've had deep dives into certain topics where we think people, certain countries are leaders. So, for example, we're doing a complete review of our player pathway at the moment, our academies. So our technical division have been looking at the world's best. Who are the world's best in terms of developing technical, world-class players, going in and having a really deep look into certain topics. When we were battling with coming back from COVID, of course, as well documented, the German league was the one that kept going. So we've spent quite a bit of time with the DFB understanding protocols and the challenges to come back, to make sure that we came back strongly. So, what they might not know is we're also following them around their key data. So we've got an ambition. We want to be the best women's league in the world. So we are tracking them on a number of key metrics, because we need to understand, what does it mean to be the world's best, and what is the benchmarks for the best audiences, the best digital followings and engagements, the best attendances, the best commercial revenues, etc. So we've been looking at a lot of data across women's sports leagues, women's football leagues, and men's leagues as well, as part of really understanding what is world's best, and where's the best practice, and what can we learn to get there. So a sort of strategic approach to it, as well as a collaborative approach.
I guess we're going to face some really stiff competition from our colleagues in the NWSL. I'm certain of that. They'll be keeping a close eye on every move, Kayleigh, for sure. But we're seeing this injection of star power over there now, with sports women starting to invest in other women, in football clubs in particular, with the likes of Naomi Osaka and Serena Williams. I mean, what sort of impact and message does that send, this idea of women investing in women?
Well, I really like it for a couple of reasons. So if people don't know the sort of the backdrop to it, a number of women's sports stars and actresses have been investing, particularly in Angel City, which I think is a working title for the new women's football club in LA. What I love about it is women getting behind women, because I think often the media don't portray women that way, which has never been my experience. So I think that's fantastic that women are supporting women to succeed. They've got an ambition to be the first, I guess, predominantly women-owned football club, and some really interesting ambitions about how they use the power of that football club and the power of those athletes to really engage local people to play sport, get active, and particularly girls. And I think that's really interesting as well. You know, we've launched our new women's football strategy around inspiring positive change. We're really, really conscious and excited of and motivated by what women's football can do for society. So watching that project really closely and think it's fantastic and fascinating. So definitely one to watch, I think.
And Ashlee, if I can just throw up the final question to you as somebody who's built a club from the ground up. I mean, how do we move away from this constant focus of short-term survival and move closer towards the long sustainable futures that we all talk about?
Right. No, great question. I think if we can just keep that goal in mind, front and center with, you know, to guide us in our decision making, to keep continuing to build that sustainable foundation for a thriving future. I think we'll continue to chip away at this institutional narrative that has created some obstacles for us to get up and running. We need to keep investing in the right people to drive the women's game forward. I think that's another critical piece. If you have somebody leading that just doesn't get it, you're delaying the process completely, right? But to ultimately achieve some sustainable futures, we need to continue to create the culture of the women's game, right? We need to continue to build these communities around the women's game. And I think that's where we're going the right direction, but we're still lacking. Like when you look at some of these models that are present with the professional men's leagues, whatever league you want to name, there are communities built around it, right? For generations in those families to come. So for example, with the Spirit, we really tried to do that where we tapped into the local communities. We did a lot of data capture driving to understand our audience so we can continually communicate and engage with them. We really focused on creating an internal culture, like a very allegiant volunteer system, intern system, employee system, and then also externally trying to create that allegiance. My current project right now with the Girls Academy, look, it comes from all angles. It has to be a full-pronged approach. It can't just be looking at the pro leagues, right? We have a pipeline of future Allegiant fans in the youth game, and we need to learn to connect the youth program. In the United States, it's extremely fragmented. We need to connect the youth program to the higher pillars of the professional leagues, and that presents its own set of challenges since we only have 10 NWSL teams, right? But we're looking to make those connections so we can help those youth players get access to the opportunities, to understand what's out there waiting for them on the pitch and behind the scenes, front office roles, referees, everything, so they can understand the landscape. So they are our pathway to a sustainable future.
On that note, thank you very much. Thank you to the panel for joining us this afternoon. Thank you all of you watching. I wish we could go for another hour or so. Unfortunately not. There's another panel up next. Ben, expect to see you in the studio. Thank you very much.